To us, Silicon Valley's new baby might seem as a thrilling and provocative new technology. But what about the people from Yemen? What about the people from Syria? What about the people from Iraq? To them, it will be a catastrophe. And this debate isn't about how lethal autonomous weapons would work in the perfect world, but rather how our world and how the international community will react to them. And given the systematic ways in which violations against human rights take place and the role of the international community, we stand for a blanket ban, as the one given to chemical weapons and for the same reason. So, in my speech, first I'm going to give the definitions. Then I'm going to give my first argument, which is about lowering the barriers of entry. And then I'm going to give my second argument, which is about the harms of robots. So, lethal autonomous weapons are machines meant to kill that operate without human intervention and solely based on algorithms. By development, we mean the investigation, the evolution, or the funding of the weapon or the algorithm. So the first argument, lowering the barriers of entry. First, I'm going to explain how they do that and then the impacts given the status quo. So, how do they do that? Well, there is one massive characteristic, which is public retaliation. Why do voters care about war? Well, they don't want to see their people dying, so they are moved by the US soldiers in the street of Saigon dying, but they do not care because the distance from them to the third world countries prevent them from that. Circles of moral caring only encompass those who are close. And what are the effects of the lethal autonomous weapons? Well, public retaliation in democracies is and has been the only factor capable of stopping humanitarian interventions, such as the one in Vietnam and Iraq, in which opposition led to retreat the soldiers. But now, voters won't feel the effects of war. Therefore, A, they won't push against reckless engagements in war, and B, there will be higher chances that they will vote for presidents who are pro-war. And why is this crucial? Well, this is crucial because of our status quo. Think about the war in Iraq and all its horrors. Who won that war? The only true winners were the CEOs of the Halliburton company. So we have to recognize two things. The first one is that most wars occur for bad motives, and even those who don't have horrifying effects because of their nature. So why are most wars for bad motives? Well, for three things. The first one is special interest, such as defiance of ideology. The second one is business and corporate interest, which have a huge grip in decision taking, thanks to tools such as campaign contribution, as the main donor to Joe Manchin, and revolving doors. And we can see that in characters such as Dick Cheney, who was the manager of Halliburton and also the vice president during the Bush era. And lastly, we also have geopolitical interests, which means that the lack of interest in defending human rights. And we can see that, for example, Saudi Arabia, thanks to its close relationship with the US, was forgiven by its human rights violations. But Libya did have to pay for what they did. So, and even if they are for good reasons, wars will most likely be catastrophic. And because of two things. The first one is that they destroy communities, because they kill civilians, for example, when urban zones are bombed. But second, they also destroy the country because of A, infrastructure. We can see that when bridges and roads are bombed and it crashes the economy, and also because of the vacuum of power. And we can see that as an example in Libya because of a fragmentation and impossibilitation of the reconstruction after the conflict. So in conclusion to the first argument, we're going to have more wars, and since war are catastrophic events, proposing development is advocating for human rights violations. So, moving on to my second argument, which is about the danger of robots. To the fact that there will be more wars, we have to add the damage of robots themselves. So first I'm going to talk about the dirty mental characteristics, and second, I'm going to draw an important comparative with soldiers. There are two new factors that we are going to have to add to the landscape once lethal autonomous are introduced. But first, I will take your point.
While wars come with consequences, why is it that even with the existent law, that war are more likely to occur?
I'm sorry, but I didn't understand your point.
Well, of course,
it's okay. So, the first thing that we're going to have to add is the execution of missions. Sending people off means that you have to take a series of precautions as the government or the soldiers. So, because common sense dictates that you have to get along with the native community since they can define your state, soldiers tend to have a good relationship with the natives, such as giving them protection or food, and governments sometimes use structures, such as water wells for the Afghan people. So, now with the autonomous weapons, there is not going to be any need to care about the backlash of their actions. So, rich Western countries will have zero motives to care for for civilians caught in war. And then we have the second thing, which is contextual judgment. The decision to kill is a balance between the moral and human element and cannot be coded into an algorithm. So now we're going to lack it. We're going to lack things such as empathy, which is the capacity to relate to another human, and that cannot be understood by machines. And the effect of this can be seen through the next comparative. That is, when soldiers kill, certain nuances are valued through moral intuition and cannot be valued through spreadsheets. So, the relevance, every war is filled with such nuances that require the human aspect, and it is logistically impossible to wire them into the machines. So, I ask, how could a robot judge a child forced to engage in war and carry a weapon? Yes?
There will always be operator, even if the operator do not intervene. This is seen as a allowance by the operator himself. Why is it that it is immoral to do this?
I'm sorry, I really didn't understand your point. So, how could a robot judge a child that is forced to engage in war and carry a weapon? And how can they judge a woman forced by terrorists to hide weapons? And how are they supposed to know the difference between bombing a hospital and another building? There is a moral difference that only humans can understand. And here's where we have to draw a very important comparative. Of course, it could be argued that lethal autonomous weapons won't have a racist bias, but they are in fact discriminatory because of the bias of targeting, meaning that the bias of targeting will not change. And why? Yes?
Would you have an international treaty like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty for LAWs?
No, we wouldn't. We will blanket ban them, such as we did with the chemical weapons, for the reasons I'm giving. So, why is it impossible for them, why do these kind of machines have a discriminatory bias? Well, it is impossible for a machine to determine whether someone is a terrorist or not out of the blue. It has to be coded to recognize terrorist-like patterns of life, or allegedly terrorist-like, such a thing through things such as GPS, social media, but especially phenotype. So basically, we're going to have a baseball card-like system of killable bodies based on characteristics that will target and kill people who probably are innocent only because of the coded and arbitrary characteristics they were given in the algorithm. So in conclusion, we're going to have low barriers of entry and a higher business incentive to engage in wars, and we also have to add the horrifying characteristics that lethal autonomous weapons have, and also that there is no comparative improvement to soldiers. So, because these weapons lead to more wars, and legitimate wars, we should blanket ban them. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, science propositions never tell us exactly how they're going to oppose to these development of LAWs. Now, opposing means different things. You can either ban it, or even follow up with the simple, with the model of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, for example, which means we'll ban it in countries which does not currently have it. We don't know clearly what kind of stance is Chat proposition setting up for. They would have to answer to this in their next speech. Now, 2 points of contention, ladies and gentlemen. First, on their point substantive, on first lowering the entrance to war, and second, on the danger of lethal autonomous weapons. Now, on lowering the entrance to war, the logic here is very simple. They are saying because countries are afraid of the citizens having to sacrifice their life in the war, this means that now we have lethal autonomous weapons to substitute these people who naturally just incentivize these countries to go to war. This is ridiculous, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because war is harmful on many levels. It's not just about the manpower, ladies and gentlemen. Now, in our world that we're living in, everything is interconnected. Now, if you go to war with a country, you will definitely ruin your stance within the world. For example, in your relationship with other countries, it will harm your businesses, many other things, ladies and gentlemen. This is not just about people going to war and sacrifice their lives. For this reason, ladies and gentlemen, this lethal autonomous weapon have nothing to do with lowering the entrance to war. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, this point does not stand. Now, on their second substantive, on the danger of lethal autonomous weapon, I will deal with this. This directly clashes with our context to characterization of lethal autonomous weapons, and for this, I'll deal with this when I'm giving a characterization of the lethal autonomous weapons. Now, while we are willing to engage in propositions definition of lethal autonomous weapons, ladies and gentlemen, we must clarify to you that while LAWs can operate without a human intervention, they often include a function which allows human operator to override a decision if necessary. This is called the kill switch, ladies and
On
gentlemen.
that point,
The reason, no thank you. Why do the militaries want to keep this? Militaries keep this function because they want to maintain the operational control over their weapons and make adjustment for unaccounted mission variables. Now, therefore, this directly deals with their second substantive. Why? Because what they're saying in their logic is that because lethal autonomous weapons don't have empathy, do not know how to differentiate between innocent children in front of them. No, ladies and gentlemen, there's always someone behind the screen who is going to monitor the lethal autonomous
On
weapon.
that
That is
point-
why we believe that this one does not stand also. Now, for this reason, in practice, most lethal autonomous weapons, for example, the Korean SGR-A1, are closely monitored by a weapon system operator who oversees the LAWs. Hence, although he does not actively operate the LAW, he provides input and approval by not intervening. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that there's always a human intervention and a human empathy which their sides are willing to believe in lethal autonomous weapon. No thank you. Now, this is better known as supervised LAW. Further, because propositions like you to believe that the world is heading toward a doomsday killer robot like type of lethal autonomous weapon, but ladies and gentlemen, this is not our reality. In fact, the technology for this type of lethal autonomous weapon has not currently exist at all. Most militaries do not prefer a fully autonomous LAW because of the aforementioned military operational control. Most importantly, their aim is never to remove the human element entirely out, but to use LAW as a force multiplier and respond to time-sensitive threats. Their goal is not and never will be to have a military entirely run by artificial intelligence. As a matter of public policy, governments also have a preference for semi or supervised LAW because they provide
on that
accountability.
point,
Yes, yes, ma'am.
it's in the name. It's lethal autonomous weapons. Therefore, there is no human intervention, and it all runs on an algorithm, and that was defined by the same companies that are working on drones, because are the same companies that are going to develop.
Yes, ladies, yes, ma'am. Well, drones still have someone monitoring it behind the screen. That doesn't mean that because no one's on the drone, that means that there's not going to be anyone who supervises it or give it agreement or something else. Moving on. Now, as a matter of public policy, governments also have preference for semi-supervised LAWs because they provide accountability. Now, our stance is very simple. We do not oppose the development of LAWs. In fact, we support the development of such technology, including its accompanying frameworks, protocols, and laws like international humanitarian law. This includes a possible code of conduct to govern the use of LAWs, or a convention that outlines the future development of LAWs. Now, our yardstick today is whichever side best strengthens global security infrastructure in both the now and in the future will take this debate. Opposition stand today with four simple substantive. First, on saving lives. Second, on bolstering operational readiness and national defense. My second speaker will tell you about developing stronger and safer frameworks and strengthening and dignifying global security. On to our first substantive, saving lives. By supporting the development of LAWs, we save lives. We can save countless number of lives by either eliminating or mitigating the need for soldiers on all air, land, sea, and the human cost, we believe, in the preservation of peace and security has been far too high. Thousands, if not more, lives have been lost. For example, in the Iraq and Afghanistan war alone, we have lost more than 10,000 American lives. However, by supporting the development of LAWs, we can significantly reduce the need for soldiers to be put in harm's way. LAWs can think and act. Unlike any piece of military hardware before, LAWs like the Atlas can replace ground troops as they can jump, carry heavy loads, navigate uneven terrain, and conduct surveillance. Even in situations where an LAW can't replace a soldier, they can still save lives by augmenting the soldiers' fighting capabilities, such as providing improved surveillance. LAWs like the Perdix allow soldiers to have a live coverage of the battlefield, avoiding blind spots that could have been hiding snipers or other traps. Additionally, LAW technology will be more affordable and thus accessible even for the developing nations. For instance, the Iraqi army has already integrated the use of LAWs in their fight against the ISIS. Now, they are machines, and thus they cannot. Now, on our second substantive, on bolstering the operational readiness and the national defense. Next, because LAWs provide you with a tangible capacity boost to a diverse number of countries which currently suffer from a defense deficit for various reasons. Now, By developing LAWs, these countries can bolster their operational readiness so as to defend and safeguard their sovereignty. We'll give you some examples. Several kinds of countries currently suffer from defense deficit, whether due to a small military or an Asian population such as Luxembourg or South Korea, respectively. In Singapore, in particular, it is an island state with one of the fastest growing populations in the world, all while being surrounded by countries with a hostile past. Countries such as these desperately require LAWs to make up for their shortfall in man. By enhancing their machine's capability, LAWs bridge this gap by in operational readiness, as they require few human operators to mount an effective defense. This is made possible only by supporting development of LAW technology, ladies and gentlemen. The continual development of such technology, like the Israeli-made trophy land system, which can repel incoming projectiles such as missiles. LAWs thus multiply the force of such nation while allowing them to build sustainable protective systems that bolster their overall national defense capabilities. For those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, very proud to oppose.
It is very clear, based on the speech that we have just heard, that side opposition does not understand this motion or what it is talking about. Before our third argument of why this creates more illegitimate wars, I'm going to do a point-by-point refutation about the speech that we have just heard. First of all, side opposition says that they did not understand what we mean by oppose, because there's many different definitions of the word oppose. To which I say our first speaker was very clear. We mean a total ban of any development of any kind of lethal autonomous weapons, analogous to the ban that we have in the status quo about chemical weapons. We think that is fairly clear. If you understand the model that is being used for chemical weapons, then you understand our model. Secondly, she tried to refute our point about how the fact that we no longer send soldiers doesn't mean that the barriers for entry for war will be lowered, because there's other reasons why war is bad. To which we say, obviously, yes, we understand that there's other reasons why war is bad, but this was not our point. Our point was that people from the countries that are sending their troops onto the third world, onto the Middle East, those people, the main cost that these wars have to them is the fact that they're sending their soldiers, their family members, their friends over there to the battlefield to die in many cases. And then when this cost is no longer there, then they're going to care significantly less, especially because we know that the media in these countries perpetrates the narrative that if we're invading that country, if we're at war with that country, it is because that country is bad, because the people there are terrorists. And we do not believe that then these people are going to have any incentive not to want to engage in that war, if that is what they believe, since now there's almost no cost to them and to their personal lives and the people they know. So we understand that war is bad for other reasons, but we're not confident that the citizens of these countries are going to understand that as well. But perhaps the most important point that I have to refute right now is side opposition's claim that there's always going to be a human operator to override any mistake that this machine might make, and a human operator that can supervise what this machine is doing and differentiate between innocent children and soldiers. To which we say, here there is a very clear line that we have to draw between drones and autonomous weapons. Drones, of course, are piloted by a human, and a human is controlling what this drone does. However, with autonomous weapons, it says it in the name, these weapons are completely autonomous, and there is absolutely no human input that is going on. These machines are being controlled by a program and by an algorithm. Yes?
Why would you create a killing machine that cannot be stopped?
Yeah, that is exactly the question that we would ask your side of the house, because your side of the house is the one that wants to do that. That is something that you have to answer if you want to win this debate. And then they brought this point about how they support accountability and humanitarian laws, and this point is going to directly clash with our third argument that I'll get to in a second. Then they brought their first argument about how this supposedly saves lives. However, it was very unclear to us why exactly they claim that these lethal autonomous weapons are going to save lives, because everything they talked about was about how they were reducing the cost of war and making these weapons more affordable and more accessible, which is exactly the problem that my first speaker presented. Because we see that when these weapons are more affordable and more accessible, it is less costly to engage in a war, and therefore wars are going to start more easily, and there are going to be more wars. We do not see how you have provided any sort of analysis as to why this point that my first speaker already said is going to save lives in any way. And then they talked about their second argument about how this is going to allow countries that in the status quo cannot defend themselves to be able to defend themselves because now they're going to have these weapons since they are more accessible. However, we think that even if the individual weapons are accessible because they are cheap or something else, which they did not really explain, we know that the development for these weapons is going to be extremely expensive because the technology required for them to be autonomous is not something that we have right now. That is why the motion is about development. So what country and what military force is actually going to be able to develop these weapons? Well, that is most likely going to be China and the US. And China and the US are only going to sell these weapons to their allies because, of course, why would they want to sell weapons to countries that they are at war with? Like, there is no reason why they would do that. So we see that actually the countries that the US and China are against are not going to receive any benefit from this, and in fact it's going to increase the inequality because only these countries that were able to develop the weapons and the allies that they decide to sell them to are going to have access to these weapons, whereas all the rest are going to be able to only suffer in a minute of the effects of these weapons while not being able to actually use them themselves. Yes?
Nuclear weapon has mass destruction and only some countries have it. Why is it that countries in the status quo do not choose to start a nuclear war?
Okay, we think there is a huge difference between nuclear weapons and these lethal autonomous weapons. The difference being that nuclear weapons have the power to destroy an entire state and an entire government, whereas these weapons only have the power to harm the select citizens that they are killing. So the impact and the way in which these two weapons are used are fundamentally different. Okay. Now I'll move on to our third argument about more illegitimate wars. And this argument is going to prove that lethal autonomous weapons undermine accountability in wars and thus increase war crimes. So, we believe that in order to avoid war crimes and human rights violations, the main thing that the international community should seek is to increase accountability. Now, why is this? Because accountability deters war crimes by providing a strong disincentive for the responsible actor to commit these crimes. Because if you commit a crime, you are then held accountable for it, and then you receive a proportional punishment. Without accountability, there would be no incentive to stop yourself from committing unnecessary killings or other types of war crimes. So, how does this relate to lethal autonomous weapons? Well, the point is that you cannot hold a machine accountable for its own actions. You cannot throw a machine in jail. You cannot make a machine undergo a punishment. You cannot make a machine understand that what it did is wrong, because a machine simply does not work that way. That is something that is inherently human. So therefore, in order to have accountability with these machines, you would need to assign a human that is responsible for the actions of the machines. Why would that be impossible? First of all, because the generals that deploy these machines do not actually give any sort of direct instruction to the machines, because these machines work by an algorithm, it would make no sense to hold the general accountable for the machine if the general did not tell the machine what to do. That would be nonsensical. And secondly, the only other person apart from this general that could be an option to hold them accountable would be the person that programmed the machine. To which we say, again, this is never going to happen, because the person that programmed the machine not only programmed this individual machine, but they programmed hundreds of them. And if one of them commits a human rights violation, then it would be extremely difficult to prove that this algorithm is the thing that caused it when hundreds of other machines are working fine. So we believe that it is also going to be extremely difficult for side opposition to hold the person that programmed all of these machines or the general accountable for the actions of the machine. So what does this mean? This means that there's going to be no enforced accountability for any actions that any of these individual machines might take. So therefore, there's not going to be any sort of incentive to try to perfect these machines and try to reduce the amount of atrocities that they commit. So this will mean that the amount of collateral damage, the amount of deaths and accidents that happen due to these machines is going to increase, because there's not going to be any strong disincentive to prevent them from doing so. So, because we believe that these machines cause more wars, worse wars, and more illegitimate wars, is why we propose a ban for them.
The biggest strategic mistake the team proposition has made in this debate is that they don't understand what is the clear definition of a lethal autonomous weapon. They drew the comparative between drones and LEWs, but actually what they are referring to in their, are referring in their speech are fully autonomous LAW. Now there is a wide scope of LAWs that are available in this world, and I don't understand why Team Peru is willing to only engage us in the smallest scope possible, which is fully autonomous weapon. Now first of all, ladies and gentlemen, fully autonomous weapons are not even, the technology for this type of weapon is not even currently existing yet. And currently, no countries or no governments are actually going for this type of lethal autonomous weapons. Why? Because of all the things that they have mentioned, because of the accountability, because they want to maintain operational control within mission. That is why all the amount of LAWs that we are currently having in this world are all supervised LAWs. We've given you many examples. First, the SGR-A1 within, that are put in the DMZ between North Korea and South Korea border. It is an LAW, but it's supervised. Else, how many innocent North Korean defectors would have it killed? Of course, there are none to it shows that is why governments around the world are supporting supervised LAW, and that is the direction that we are going in the future. Now, once I have cleared, no thank you, now, once I've cleared this definition, their third point of substantive on accountability has been rendered irrelevant, because now we have an human operator that is operating the LAW. We believe that that person can always be held accountability, but even if we take them on the best case, we say that it's very hard to actually hold a machine accountable, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a new piece of technology that is currently available in the market. That means that we can evolve the frameworks around this sort of technology and integrate it into the military chain of command. Exactly, this is what Singapore has done in 2014 when it integrated civilians into its military system. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, we should not just stop any sort of technological advancement just because there are potential risks. No, thank you, ma'am. Thus, I have dealt with all of their substantive material. Now let's move on to what they have to say about our point of substantive. 2 points of contention. First, on our substantive on saving lives, and second, on how we bolster operation readiness and national defense. First, they have stated that our point of substantive on saving life doesn't make any sense because there is no clear logical. Ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker have stated very clearly in her speech that first it saves lives by replacing the amount of soldiers that are actually in need on the battlefield. Because LAWs are a force multiplier. That means one person can operate multiple devices that can enhance operation control while reducing the amount of troops. We believe that it's simple enough. You put less troops on the battlefield, then less people will die. Secondly, we have stated already that these LAWs can even assist soldiers when humans are forced to be on the battlefield. We'll give you an example of the Perdix, where it allows humans to understand the environment around them, so that they can carry on the mission without the fear of any snipers. Now, moving on to our second point of substantive. Now, they have stated the only rebuttal to our case is that these weapons are very expensive in nature. We cannot develop them. Ladies and gentlemen, that is why we should support LAWs, because now if we support it, there will be a higher demand from these countries. That means that this will lead to mass production of LAWs, and that's why LAWs becomes cheaper. We've already given you the example of the IRT forces helping LAWs in combating ISIS. We don't think, no thank you, that is why we on our side, we believe that LAWs is something that we should support. Now moving on to our substantive material. Now we've already stated, moving on to our third point of substantive on developing stronger and safer frameworks. Now the thesis of this argument, no thank you sir, the thesis of the argument is that only by supporting LAWs can we ensure technology is developed responsibly using stronger and safer frameworks. Not the sheer profitability of LAW technology and its mass military applications means that there will always be a demand for LAWs. Thus, LAWs are likely to develop regardless of international support or objection, and by opposing it, proposition is driving such research underground, creating dangerous black markets. And actually, they stated they're going to ban it completely. This only makes the problem even worse, ladies and gentlemen, because not only this is dangerous to the international community at large, but also increases the likelihood of them being sold to nefarious individuals or governments, as these development of such technology would not be supervised. Thus, by supporting development of LAWs openly, we allow for creation of stronger and clearer frameworks like international humanitarian law that can govern the safe development of such technology. I'll take a PRS.
So therefore you would take the blanket ban from chemical weapons, right?
No, ma'am, because we already stated that chemical weapons are actually very dangerous. We're not saying that we should support chemical weapons just because we support LAW. We support LAW because it can save people in the battlefield. Does chemical weapon do that? No, ma'am, that is illogical. Now, moving on to the substantive, no thank you. Proposition it's likely to say that in both cases, there will be an underground or black market of some sort. And they exist for the more aggressive and dangerous LAWs desired by the same buyers. The difference between our world and their world is that the black market is much more prevalent and much more dangerous without any proper safeguard. Now, the advancement of LAW technology allows government interagency and government collaboration to actually clamp down on these markets because now they don't have any incentive to let such undergrounds flourish. In Proposition's world, however, governments may not even have the incentive to do so because they too design such technologies but cannot develop them openly. Thus, by supporting the development of LAWs, we encourage the creation and enforcement of stronger frameworks that go a long way in creating a safer world. Moving on to our final substantive on strengthening and dignifying global security. This happens on 3 distinct tiers. First, LAWs allow organizations like the UN to respond to international emergencies with an appropriate force. Second, in a timely manner. And third, it eliminates the inequality between developed and developing nations, where the latter has no choice but to sacrifice the life of its soldier for the sake of global security, while the former simply foots the bill. LAWs correct this inequality among nations, which in turn restores the dignity attached to global security. Now, on the first level, international organizations worldwide are facing a human resource deficit. The number of troops required for peacekeeping missions are on the rise, while the number of troops that countries are willing to contribute are continually declining. This prevents organizations from responding with the appropriate force size and type required to stabilize war-torn regions like Congo or South Sudan. No, thank you, ma'am. Now, LAWs like the US defenders with peacekeeping capabilities resolve this human resource deficit by replacing the need for and the number of troops on the battlefield. Once purchased, field operators are required to supervise these LAWs, and the LAWs themselves can be maintained as a quick response force, ready to deployment in a matter of days. And this leads nicely to the next tier. First, no thank you, the human deficit problem is compounded by the time required to assemble and deploy a suitable response force. The UN, for example, takes an average of 10 months to muster up a peacekeeping mission, during which time thousands of lives will have been lost, ladies and gentlemen. This is what happened in Somalia and Sierra Leone. Now, more worryingly, this is a systematic problem that organizations beyond the UN, like the African Union, is also facing. It's systematic because such response forces are traditionally comprised of infantrymen from multiple countries with vastly different training regimes and requires physical allocation. With the development of LAWs, however, the problem of political will is also resolved. This because historically, countries have preferred to lend the UN equipment or logistics rather than its soldiers. As fewer human lives are at stake, a decision will be reached faster. Thus, LAWs significantly reduce the time required for making a decision and the time required for actually sending response force, thus saving many more lives as a result. Now, moving on to a final tier, by almost eliminating the need for ground troops, developing nations like Ethiopia or Bangladesh, which are currently contributing the most number of peacekeepers around the world, need not have to risk their lives anymore. Instead, funds designated for training and deployment of troops could have been redirected to the purchase and the maintenance of LAWs. Thus, on our side, we believe that with the LAW, with its new integration into the security, we believe that it fulfills we believe that it actually strengthens and dignifies global security, and therefore, please go for side opposition. Thank you.
Before proceeding with our 3 points of clash, I will be discussing what should not be an issue of this debate, and it's the idea of what is a lethal autonomous weapon. What they've said basically is that they support supervised lethal autonomous weapons, which we believe already makes it clear that they don't support the full characteristics of lethal autonomous weapons because they would be conceding that there is some need for human supervision. But the truth is that even if this is the case, there is no real control over humans on the battlefield. Sure, what they're saying is you can turn them off, you can choose when to unleash them, but on the battlefield, these are weapons that make their own decisions. To use an analogy, it would make absolutely no sense to say that paid assassins are not really autonomous because you can decide when to pay them and what their job is. Obviously, they're making real decisions on the battlefield, and this is what's relevant to today's debate. And additionally, we would like to say that a blanket ban will be highly effective since only governments have the resources to fully develop these abominations. In any case, let's move on with the 3 points of clash that we found in today's debate. First, more wars, second, worse wars, and finally, more illegitimate wars. Let's start with which side of the house would have more wars, because this is an area that we believe is completely crucial given the terrible impacts of war which both sides have thus far agreed upon. We brought this point about barriers of entry, how for great powers, the only thing that will deter them from utterly destroying another country is the loss of lives on their own side. To this, they responded that the harms of war are very significant, that even if soldiers were dying, there would still be deterrence. No, thank you. But we draw a very clear distinction between the United States and countries like it and countries like Korea, like Vietnam, that in their time had to face the full horrors of war. Because the United States never had any civilian infrastructure destroyed, it never had any children dying, all it had was soldiers dying, and as a result, if you take out the soldiers, the only impact on the United States for that war is eliminated, and they have absolutely no deterrence whatsoever to pursue a bloody policy of expansionism and violence. But in any case, let's move on with the fact that they've said, no thank you, that these would actually be positive because they would be helping positive organizations like the UN and so on carry out peaceful missions in order to restore the security of the world and so on. We've already given several systematic reasons as to why the vast majority of wars are not going to be these kinds of interventions that they advocate for. Why? Because the vast majority of wars are pushed by corporate interests, because they're pushed by geopolitical allegiances, they're pushed by a number of factors that they have not appropriately interacted with in today's debate, and that therefore continue to stand up till this speech. And finally, we need to consider all of the harms of war, the power vacuum which enables terrorist groups such as ISIS to rise, the destruction of infrastructure permanently for these countries, and the deaths of millions of people. These are all things that will happen regardless of whether the war is done for humanitarian reasons or for all of the reasons that they have failed to interact with. In any case, let's move on with the second clash, which is which side of the House would have worse wars. And what they're saying is that their wars would be better because they have more life saved, because they'd be taking out the soldiers, and as a result, wars would be less bloody. We fundamentally disagree with this characterization for the simple fact that the vast majority of the victims of war are actually civilians. Civilian casualties tend to be far superior to the casualties of soldiers. And even if this were not the case, we believe that we should prioritize civilians for one simple reason. As of now, the vast majority of armies in the world don't practice conscription. That is, all of the soldiers that fight are doing so willingly and consensually because they love their countries. In contrast, civilians have no say in what is going on and are often the most vulnerable stakeholders, such as poor children and families. This, we believe, is why we should prioritize civilians over soldiers, even if we believe that the civilian cost is higher anyways, just in numerical terms. And finally, I'll take your point first.
You conceded in your second speech that the technology for fully autonomous weapons does not exist. So why are you pushing this
Yes,
debate?
very simple response to that. This motion is about development, not actually putting them into practice. Therefore, what we oppose is the development of these sorts of weapons. In any case, they also talked about how this would get countries to be prepared to defend themselves, but to that we have a very simple response. Firstly, at the moment these weapons are expensive, so they would result in the kind of disbalance that we have brought forth. But even looking into the future, if these weapons became a lot cheaper, these are evidently offensive weapons and not pieces of defensive military infrastructure. They are not like forts, they are not like trenches, they're a lot more like cannons, chemical weapons, and so on. And what we believe, therefore, is that countries would not be as much prepared to defend themselves as prepared to attack other countries, and this would result in a rise in conflict around the world, alongside all the other reasons that we've discussed today. And then they brought an analogy with nuclear weapons. That is, nuclear weapons serve as a deterrent, and therefore our point falls. We believe, as we have said again and again, that nukes are fundamentally different in that they destroy entirely what is meant to be defended. If a nuke is used against a country, they know that they stand no chances of avoiding an enormous catastrophic destruction of a city. But this is not the case with lethal autonomous weapons. If both sides have lethal autonomous weapons, it is akin to both sides having soldiers, to both sides having tanks, to both sides having chemical weapons. There is virtually no deterrent, and all there is an escalation of the war to destructive levels. And finally, we'd like to move on with the last point of clash for today's debate, which is that of illegitimate wars. They conceded entirely that under the lethal autonomous weapons that we are debating today, those that are actually lethal autonomous weapons, there would be issues with accountability, and thus the entirety of our third argument continues to stand. However, they have decided to refute what is really not within the bounds of this debate, and they've decided to turn this into a definition debate. And if that is the case, we say the following. Even if we go with what they have said, with higher levels of accountability, with higher levels of human intervention, we get higher levels of accountability. That is, the more you reduce the level of human control over these weapons, the less accountability we're going to have. And thus, under any measure of autonomy that we grant the weapons, regardless of whether it is relatively minor or relatively large, we will still have issues with accountability that do not exist in the status quo, and thus, on the whole, this will be a problem. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that for these three fundamental reasons, lethal autonomous weapons are a problem. Because ultimately they provoke more wars, and we believe that more wars are going to be harmful regardless of the intentions of these wars, because they provoke worse wars, as we have shown by demonstrating that lethal autonomous weapons have systematic problems that are not common with civilians, that are not common with soldiers, as is the case with the fact that they do not properly empathize and understand the deep morality involved in the situations of war. And additionally, we believe that we will have more illegitimate wars because of the rampant levels of lacking accountability that will be taking place. Ultimately, for these three reasons, we believe that side proposition should definitely take this debate. You have a very important choice to make here, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that for these three reasons, illegitimate wars, worse wars, and more wars, we should definitely take this debate. Thank you.
Before moving on to analyze this debate by asking three questions, two strategic mistakes coming from side proposition. First, they choose to limit this debate into finding only fully autonomous debate. We have clearly stated out that there are three types of lethal autonomous weapons. This is where they do not want to engage with us in this debate by do not acknowledging that there were three types of lethal autonomous weapon, but they choose only to argue only on the most extreme side of the scope. Secondly, they refuse to engage with all of our substantive provided from the beginning of this debate. We'll further on analyze why is this harmful in the very first place. Three questions in this debate. First, what is the status quo? Second, which side saves more life in the short term? And lastly, which side benefits global security in the long run? Moving on to asking the first question on what is the status quo. As stated before, there are three types of lethal autonomous weapons: semi-supervised and fully autonomous weapon. It is clearly stated from the very beginning that the world has not and will never switch to fully autonomous for very simple reasons.
Beyond the fact that it's the first time that you mentioned that there are three types, I would like to ask you, how would you define the word autonomous?
We clearly stated there are three types from the very beginning. Proposition is misrepresenting us in that case. And furthermore, we believe that regardless of how autonomous these weapons are, there will always be human intervention and human control over it, because when humans do not directly intervene in these operation of these weapons, it means that they already gave their approval for these robots to carry out the mission. It is for that reason that we believe that accountability and these things can still take place. First, the government wants to maintain Operation No Control because they can intervene if necessary. Furthermore, it will also protect accountability, because there's no reason for the government to create weapons that they cannot control. Here's where I add another layer of analysis. Governments always want to keep human control with lethal autonomous, because they acknowledge that in case of emergency, it is easy to track and fix the problem when you know who is developer or who's in control. And because of that, this is exactly the reason why there's no incentive for countries to switch to developing a fully autonomous weapon. We have already stated that even if that countries do want to develop a fully autonomous weapon, we are willing to defend it on our side. Because for the simple reason that even if these weapons are fully autonomous, we believe that it can still save more lives compared to side proposition. Moving on to the next clash on which side saves more life in the short term. First, on the argument on saving life. We have proven to you there are two distinct reasons on why we save more life. First, less soldiers will be on the battlefield. And second, this acts as a force multiplier, which means essentially one human can multitask. They completely drop this argument, and their only response to this is that people still have to go to war and you don't save life. But we believe that on a comparative, when less soldiers are put into the battlefield and one human can simply do more, we believe that on-side opposition we save significantly more lives. Furthermore, no thank you, madam, from the mechanism of replacing soldiers with lethal autonomous weapons, we can prevent trauma such as PTSD. Lethal autonomous like wildcats do not suffer from psychological effects caused by high pressure situations like humans do. They are machines that cannot suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or any other affliction that might plague soldiers. And because of that, we believe that not only do we save lives, but we also protect soldiers in short and the long run. Furthermore, we believe that
Madam.
no, thank you, sir. We believe that although war has a consequence to itself, we believe that this is very inevitable. This is why there are regulations and frameworks such as the international humanitarian law, which is a code of conduct in war. Because all governments acknowledge that it is inevitable for wars to happen, and these frameworks are developed to ensure that it does not, when it does happen,
On that point,
they will make sure that it is safe. Yes, ma'am.
beyond the fact that we have already explained why we are prioritizing the civilian's life, the same people who direct current wars would order and code these autonomous weapons. Therefore, why would they act any different or direct any different that they are currently doing?
We believe that there are various reasons for countries to go to war, and it is clear that government side proposition is to not understand what we're talking from the very first beginning. And because there are various factors that accounts for reasons that countries do not go to war. For example, saving lives, or not only saving lives, but they will also do not want to lose their stand in the international community. Because in this world, we're living in an interconnected world whereby communities and countries are connected by not only diplomatic traits or a lot of factors that they do not want to create conflicts with another. For this reason, that is very crucial and clear why is it that countries do not want to go to war. The example of nuclear weapon that was brought up before, that only certain countries do have this kind of weapon, but they still do not choose to go to war with these kind of weapon, has not been responded by side proposition. Believe that it is very clear and that government will not go to war whenever they feel like to. Moving back to our case. We believe that even if that war does happen, it is better on our side, because essentially we send less soldiers to the battlefield and essentially save more life. Moving on to the question on which side strengthen global security in the long run. First, on developing stronger and safer framework. This argument was completely dropped by side proposition. Lethal autonomous weapon can involve the military in many ways, and furthermore, this business is clearly very profitable. This is why, despite a call for ban or opposition, there can always be a demand for these lethal autonomous weapons, and therefore it is clear that development of lethal autonomous will continue regardless of what opposition that it may face. And because of that, we believe that when proposition pushes for a total ban, it is more harmful on their side because they drive these research underground. Therefore, it will have a higher chance to be sold to dangerous individual or government. However, this does not happen on our side because it is legal, and there is no reason for companies or individuals to buy these technology in underground anymore. And furthermore, when it is open, companies or technological companies can furthermore create and invest in more research and development because they do not face any risk of being jailed or being faced with laws stated by side propositions. Therefore, believe that it is far more safer on our side. Moving on to the last part of this clash, on strengthening and dignifying global security. We provide three distinct tiers to this argument on how there will be the response on peacekeeper response will be more appropriate force and will be done on a more timely manner, and last on how the majority of peacekeeper will lose less life. There is no response coming from side proposition. First, on how this will essentially create more appropriate force. We believe that the amount required for peacekeeping force is becoming higher, and the amount of countries that are willing to give is less. And because of that, we believe that countries are willing, historically, countries are more willing to give logistic and financial aid rather than sending their own troops. And because of that, we believe that LIWs is an investment that countries are likely to make and more likely to willing to contribute to these peacekeeping force. Secondly, on how this essentially create a more timely manner response, because there are many factors that soldiers need to carry out. And for this reason, we believe that essentially outside opposition will save more lives and protect the global security in the long run. For all this reason, very proud to oppose.
Before moving on to identify the very important issues of today's debate, I would like to clarify the definition of what LAWs actually are, since it was a rather messy debate. Now, the question here is that which sides of LAW is actually closer to reality? On our side, where our definition of LAWs encompasses all types of LAWs that are actually invented. On the international position regarding LAWs, on what type of LAWs the government or militaries actually want. And the result is that people prefer supervised or semi-autonomous LAWs. They're still autonomous because they don't make their decisions. The decisions are not made by anybody else. They make the decision themselves. But then it contains a kill switch so that lets any human operator actually stops it from actually committing any sort of war crimes. It doesn't happen on our side. This is why this is more preferred by the military, because they can add operational control in their value, and it actually has accountability on our side. Or would you like to believe their side's definition of LAWs, which is a hypothetical version of LAWs that doesn't even exist yet in our reality, where they are willing to say that LAWs are basically Terminators without any sort of kill switch, that they are just going to throw them into the jungles of Rwanda and killing people without actually people stopping it, which is actually closer to reality. Of course, that is side opposition. Now, since that has been dealt with, I'll move on to the three important issues of today's debate. First, which side protects soldiers? Second, which side protects peace? And finally, which side protects the safe development of LAWs? Now, moving on to our first important issues. First, which side better protects soldiers? Ladies and gentlemen, our side is the only side that actually touches soldiers in the first place in this debate. We've offered you three distinct lines of logic on how LAWs saves the lives of soldiers on the battlefield. First, by replacing them, as LAWs act as a force multiplier that actually allow less soldiers on the battlefield with the same efficiency. Second, we say LAWs can assist these soldiers by providing them surveillance so that they can operate with more efficiency. And finally, we protect soldiers by having less soldiers on the battlefield. It means that less soldiers are going to suffer from post-traumatic disorders that are actually devastating the families of many soldiers that return from the battlefield. This is something that side of proposition has never actually touched. Second of all, which side actually protects peace? Now, on our side, we protect peace because we offer a chance for countries like Singapore to actually bolster their national defense. Because for a country with such small population, but surrounded by other countries with a very hostile past, how would they actually defend themselves with such a small number of people and a growing population? The answer is LAWs, and that is why we advocate the development of these sort of weapons. But furthermore, we advocate because it protects peace in the way that it allows organizations like the UN to send aid to countries that are in international humanitarian crisis, because they allow these countries to respond with appropriate force in a timely manner and actually requires less lives of soldiers for LADCs. Now, on their side, they insist that LAWs actually lower the barrier of entry. But the logic they present is very simple, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the soldiers' lives are not going to be at risk. These countries are going to enter war more easily without actually considering international relations, business relations, or the reaction of the international community. That line of logic doesn't make sense. This is the crux of the whole case. Thus, we have actually won this debate. But then moving on to our final point, our final important issue of this debate. Which side ensures the development of LAWs? Now, this is something that their side has not touched upon, ladies and gentlemen. We have actually explained to you very carefully how, only by supporting the development of LAWs, important frameworks will be crafted surrounding these sort of weapons, because, like it or not, the development of LAWs are going to continue into the future. And only by supporting it can we stop dangerous black markets from actually persisting and selling these very dangerous weapons to dangerous individuals, something that their side is going to exacerbate because they're going to ban it completely. And for all those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, please vote for side opposition.
There is something very clear that both sides of the House agree on. There is no reason for the government to create weapons that they cannot control. Unfortunately, it seems like, to a large extent, this debate has become a definition debate about what is autonomous. However, I believe it is pretty clear because anyone that owns a dictionary can look it up, and you can see that autonomous is something that works independently on its own. It is something automatic. It is not something that is being controlled by a human behind the screens. That is what this debate is about. This debate is about machines that work with an algorithm that does not involve human input. This debate is not about semi-autonomous machines, or like sort of, kind of, but not really autonomous machines. This debate is about machines that work fully independently of human control. So there have been three main clashes. Firstly, the whole clash about which side of the House creates more wars. Secondly, worse. Thirdly, the whole point about accountability and illegitimate wars. So let's go through them one by one. So firstly, we give to this whole argument about how autonomous weapons lower the barriers of entry. both sides of the House seem to agree that autonomous weapons are more accessible and cheaper than other types of military resources, so that is something that we have both agreed on. And furthermore, we brought this point about how no longer taking your soldiers to the battlefield reduces public retaliation, something which we have not heard any proper refutation for. So, I think it is pretty clear that to a large extent, we both agree that since these weapons are more accessible now, and given that there's the same incentives to go to war under both sides of the House, but now the requirements are less, so it's easier to go to wars, then more wars will happen under opposition's side of the House. Then, worse wars. Well, first of all, we brought to you another point about how these machines don't have any empathy and therefore are going to be more reckless with their actions. Again, this is a point that was not properly refuted to a larger extent than just their definition of, oh, but there's a human, which we have said over and over, that is not the types of weapons that we're talking about in this debate. Then the point about inequality that side opposition brought, and we gave extensive refutation explaining how China and the US are going to be the countries that develop these weapons, and from then on, they're going to be the ones that control who these weapons are given to. Again, that is a point that we saw no risk from. The point that side opposition did try to bring was about how we are saving soldiers with these weapons, to which we realized, yeah, of course you're saving soldiers. However, as our third speaker already said, we do not understand why we would need to prioritize the lives of saving soldiers who consented to go to the war over the lives of these civilians that the autonomous weapons will be killing to a much greater extent, as I already explained in our previous class. Not only that, but also like statistically, the amount of fatalities that happen towards civilians is far greater than the amount of fatalities that happen towards wars. And then they brought their point about humanitarian wars, to which we already again refuted this, saying that there's no reason why, if the intention of the war is to be humanitarian and help people, that that's actually going to lead to a positive outcome in the war, and we've given you many examples of which wars with good intentions ended up not happening. Again, a point that was not refuted. So side opposition has no points as to why wars would be less horrible under their side of the House, but we brought to you many reasons why they would be more bad. And lastly, the point about more legitimate wars. Again, I brought to you a whole argument about that in my second speech. And side opposition's only response to this was, again, hinged on their evidently, clearly wrong definition of autonomous weapons, saying that there is a human controlling these actions. However, we can all reasonably know that this is not the case, because those are not the types of weapons that we're talking about. So it is very easy for us to take this clash, since their whole point about this was hinged on something that is fundamentally false. So, because we have proven over and over again that wars with autonomous weapons will be more frequent, they will be worse, and they will involve less accountability for war crimes, it's why we believe that allowing their development is a terrible idea. Thank you.